Hello, everyone. Can everybody hear me okay? We all good? A thumbs up or something like that if you can hear, if you can see the application. All right, so I see some thumbs. Thank you so much. I am Percy Turner all day today, so I am going to thank you, Dana. I appreciate that. Um, I am here to talk about solution focused problem solving. So we're just going to dive right into it. Typically, I would tell you why you should listen to me and talk about my degree and talk about what I do, but we got an hour, friends. So I'm going to do the best that I can not to overtalk and to just move us through our material. Okay. So our objectives today, we're going to talk about typical problem solving that centers the problem as the focus. This may feel familiar to you as we talk more. We're going to talk about appreciative inquiry. We'll talk about kind of where that comes from, and we'll talk about how we can utilize that to shift our focus from the problem to skills that we have and to solutions that we can come up with. We'll talk about that as a viable means to address problems, and then I'll give you some steps and just to create some of that new connection and put some rubber to the road. So let's keep it moving. We're going to discuss problem solving, but I want to think about how we look at problems. So, oftentimes, problems can be teachers. Some of our most dynamic learning comes from facing difficult decisions or overcoming overwhelming problems. If you think about all of the wonderful ways that you have grown as an employee and even as a person in some cases, some of our most dynamic memories in terms of what we learned about ourselves and about what we do has come from problems as teachers. Problems can also be milestones, right? So thinking about growth and the idea of, hey, maybe we need to hire some new staff or maybe we need to assign a new team. This might be a growth issue, right? These are good problems, right? Not all problems are created equal. They can be indicative of success. And so they still need to be addressed, but they don't necessarily need to be looked at as negative things. And so not all problems are that. And then last but not least, teams tend to grow together and develop deeper relationships as they challenge and conquer as a group. Everybody here, if I told you to think about your best friend, if I told you to think about the person that knows you the most, the person that you're able to be vulnerable with, that person and you have gone through some problems. Right now, it doesn't necessarily mean that you fought each other or anything like that, but you learn how to trust when problems are on the table. You learn how to be vulnerable when problems are on the table. You learn a lot about yourself and about the other people, right? We talk about the idea that when the cards are down, we learn who each other really are, that sort of stuff. So problems can be a bonding agent, and they can help us push forward and push through. So in that regard, problems have power, right? So we grow our capacity here, we deepen our professional bonds here, we can discover new skills and we can discover new innovations here. So in this way, if we continue to look at problems as the catalyst for these great things, then it gives the problem more power than solution, right? So think about growth that you've had and the problems that you've addressed in order to grow. What if you didn't need those problems? What if we didn't need adversity to grow, to learn, to connect, to deepen our relationships? What if we could grow these things without fear to push us into that discomfort so that we want to change? Traditional organizational development typically focuses on finding and fixing problems, right? And so in this way, we are more likely to fixate on what's going wrong and create solutions that are designed to maintain that status quo. So in that regard, if we're dealing with problem focus, we are growing just enough to address the problem, and then success looks like problems being addressed and not people being grown, not people developing new skills. We're not celebrating our successes, we're celebrating the resolution of our problems. And so that's kind of the point that I'm making here. Now, as we get into this, here's your portion of this to do some work. What are some significant things you're facing in your work? And you don't necessarily need to if you don't feel comfortable, but I would love to see some chat work in terms of what's going on in your work right now and what have you done or what are you doing to address those problems. If you don't feel comfortable putting it in chat, that's fine, but I do want you to kind of record it and think about it. As we go through this training, I want you to kind of reference back to how can you look at this a little bit differently using the approach that we're getting ready to get into. So I'm going to give you about a minute, maybe a minute and a half to really think about some significant problems you're facing and things that you have done or have tried in the past to address them. Give you about another 30 seconds. I don't think that if and continue to write if our if our minute goes and you want to capture, continue. Kitty, thank you. Kitty says an old ugly rivalry from an old job that won't go away. And so I'm sure then just the descriptive words that you used, there have been plenty of things that both you and your rival have tried. Michelle says, riding the balance between meeting program outcomes and honoring employee fatigue. Ooh, employee fatigue is something I might have to use in the future. So Michelle, I hope you're okay with letting that phrase go. Staff miscommunication issues. We've had team building workshops. Love this. Personality conflicts between employees. Love this. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Lorene. Shifting boundaries without offending others. Love that, Hector. Thank you. Now, what I want you to do is I want you to keep these in mind. Sarah says, dealing with assistants who continuously show up late to work and don't seem to be trying to change. Thank you, Sarah. Appreciate that. Change in job description, moving to an undeveloped program. Thank you, Julie. Jeffrey says, employees that expect more when not willing to give more in return. Changes in learning the new flow of things. Christy, thank you. Also, hey.
Hi, how are you?
Okay, so in this regard, what I want you to do is I want you to think about what you've written about. I want you to think about, whether it's on paper or whether it's in chat. Totally understand. Let's instead, I'm going to ask you, when have you done your best work? Or if you talked about a team, like, so someone talked about assistants and someone talked about personality conflicts between employees. So I want to make sure that we're not just focusing on ourselves. What are 3 times where the subject of the problem, whether that's your employees, teams, yourself, or assistants, or your supervisors, have done your best work, right? What skills did you leverage? Let's really dig into that. What partnerships did you make? What did you learn about yourself? Or what did they learn about themselves? What did they report to you? And have there been anything that they learned then that they use now? Right? What we're doing is we're trying to frame where strength comes from. So where does the strength on your team and with your assistants or with employees or what have you, where does it come from? How much success is due to doing your best work and putting the skills that you have talked about into practice? So what we're trying to do, what I asked you for first was, what's the problem? What are some problems? You told me some problems. Now I'm asking you to take that same population that you talked about in terms of problems and tell me when they've done their best work. And what did that look like? What partnerships were made? What skills were deployed? What did that look like? So again, I'll give you about a minute and some change. Love that, Michelle. Hard truth, but I know I have to manage my own workload and life balance in order for me to show up in supportive ways so that others can do the same. I love the idea of being an example of work-life balance. It's really, really difficult to promote something you're not exemplifying. Because when you promote something, people immediately begin to look at you to see what the example is. When my supervisor says, take care of your family first, work will wait, it makes me want to work harder while I'm there. Love that. When all parties come to the table, says Melissa, at the same time and listen with the intent to understand, not to manage or mitigate risk. Transparency all the time in what I'm doing. When have you done your best work? And what did you need to do that? What did you develop to do that? Active listening, empathetic responses. Love this, learning. Julie says, learning, I had the ability to draw word pictures to enable buy-in from partners. I needed to be very specific about the outcomes that were expected. A change in mindset, says Jeffrey, experienced by the employee to fulfill their responsibilities. Love this. Okay, so I'm gonna move on to the next slide, but if you still have things that you're typing, I want you to put it there. But I want you to note, so let's see, we had a significantly smaller response pool in the positives. In the when did you do your best work and what did you need? Carol says, I've grown to ask for help from others that may not be involved in my job that can give me a better picture, I'm hoping, and not just a picture of bitterness, but in either case, if it works, it works. A bigger picture. See, okay, that's fine. So when we're talking about problems, how did it feel? How did it feel to think about the problems? And if something changed when you changed focus, I want you to name it here. So, like I said, we had a pretty significant response to folks talking about problems and people responding to those problems. We had a lot of support, right? Hey, I feel you, I understand. We had a lot of emojis being put, hearts and thumbs ups and things like that happening. And there was less of that when we talked about changing that focus. Melissa says open information from management on the desired outcome, the reason for change, that increased buy-in from staff. Love that. In the midst of a lot of change, I have found that our team appreciates and benefits from over communication and leaning into one another, even when it feels like there isn't always time to do so. I love this. So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to establish that we are currently more focused or more able to enumerate our problems than we are to discuss where we learn and what our successes are. Right? We have a problem-focused professional society. And in this way, when we change our focus to thinking about when have we done our best work, when are we really developing and growing and learning, we have much less to say. When problems become bigger than we are, we end up seeing a lot of things happen. History begins to repeat itself. We see that that problems get so big, they affect how we view each other. They affect how our culture is. So Kitty said, mostly I thought only a lawyer was a solution. You're asking me to think about it differently. I am. I am asking you to think about problems differently. Problem solvers, end up becoming more reactive. They end up dealing with problems as they arise, expecting to move from one problem to the next. Think about your professional experience. Have you worked a job where you felt like a firefighter? Anybody ever hear that term? I'm fighting fires, right? Firefighters go from one fire to the next fire. That idea that what I'm doing here, what my job is to address problems. All I'm doing is just running from one problem to the next problem to the next problem. So what does that mean? We become disinterested in being proactive or seeing ourselves as lacking the capacity to develop unless there's a problem that makes us develop. So if you ever get an idle moment, if you're a problem solver and you see yourself as a problem solver, you get a moment where there's no problem, you have a choice. You can go look for a problem, which is what typically we do in a problem-focused professional space, or you can develop yourself, right? But typically, development feels like, and it was even said here, we might not have the time, we might not have the ability. If you have a moment, you should be preparing for the next problem, because we know that problems are coming. If problems are the only constant in your work, development doesn't have space. You are unable to grow unless there's a problem making you grow, because that's the language, that's the understanding you have about the work that you do. Right? Julie says, learning to let go of what I cannot control. I am a fixer. So waiting on others that do not move as quickly as I think things should move drives me crazy. Very vague expectations. Hearing, I don't know what it looks like, but I want this. Those are all, Julie, I completely understand. And the concept of being a fixer, and I'm going to use that word if that's okay with you. If I'm a fixer and nothing is broken, I'm useless. I feel kneecapped. I don't have anything to do. I don't think of myself outside of that role of how I address the problems, if the problem is the focus. So we see success as a product of change. We see success as, hey, what we're doing isn't enough to address our problems, so we have to change how we're doing. We conceptualize change as the development of something new or the extinguishing of current behavior to address a problem. Right? So when we have our successes, they're not our successes. They are the resolution of problems. So problem focus does a few things we've already discussed. It centers that problem. It creates a culture where development is reactive and not proactive, and it can downplay development to problem solve. So in this way, a victory that you experience is the solved problem, not the development of yourself as a problem solver. We are looking at status quo. So if we get to the status quo, that's not a success. That's a resolution of a problem to get us to where we're supposed to be. So in this way, how are we successful? The employees with personality conflicts both excel at their jobs away from each other, and attempted solutions have very much been reactive. Right? So we're not growing these people. We are addressing the problem. We're addressing problems. This training is not to suggest that we stop dealing with problems or stop facing problems. We're trying to offer another path for development that doesn't empower the problem, that fosters proactivity, and that connects staff with growth that they're in charge of. So when we're talking, for example, when we're talking about the example that I'm gonna have to grab your name from the chat. Greg, you talk about two employees that don't get along. They have personality conflicts. So when we're talking about this from a reactive space, we're talking about trying to get these people not to argue with each other. So exactly what Greg said, they excel at their jobs away from each other. So we're going to solve the problem by moving this person over here to this team and moving this person over there to that team and make sure that they never cross, because the problem is they don't get along. What we're not going to do is do some sort of mediation that grows both of these staff. What we're going to do is we're going to separate them, put one person over here, put one person over there, and then get back to the status quo, right? And so oftentimes when we are firefighting, our success is getting back to the status quo. And so we don't have the time or the energy to grow ourselves and to grow our staff. So, okay, let's talk about how we might shift this a little bit with the ideology of appreciative inquiry. If you are wondering what it is in a nutshell, the sentence under the title, can you fix a community, organization, or even the world, based on doing more of what works well? Okay. What are we good at? What do we care about? Now, this was developed in the 80s by David Cooper-Ratter during his graduate research in Cleveland with the Cleveland Clinic. Cooper-Ratter focused on the impact of cooperation, innovation, and egalitarian governance when we're talking about change management. It is a strength-based approach. It invites you to consider what's working well. That's always going to be the focus. When you get a problem, instead of saying, once you know that the problem exists, instead of saying, how are we going to address the problem, you start out with, where are we strong? What do we do well? And how can we leverage what we do well against what's going on right now? Now, this is used in all walks of professional life. And that's what we're going to kind of be trying to build and talk about more. A big element of problem solving is a knowledge of capabilities. Now, this is another thing that I think is really, really important. If you're going to develop appreciation as culture, you have to have an understanding. So if you are a supervisor sitting in this training right now, I want you to really think about how much you know about your employee skill sets. If you had a problem that you talked about that had to do with employees, if it had to do with conflicts, if it had to do with program outcomes and employee fatigue, whatever it had to, if there were employees involved, how well do you know your employees? How well do you know the people whose fires you put out? Right? What are their skills? The more we have an understanding of what skills and motivations that people have, the more we can assess, classify, and address issues as they arise. What skills do these people have? Not just what job do they have, but what skills do they have? When we ask, what are we doing well? If we don't have an answer to that question, if we can't say, hey, the staff members who don't get along very well, they're really interested in blank. They really do this very well. They're really passionate about this. It's going to be really difficult to develop an appreciative space. We don't know what to appreciate. Right? So we have to get to a point where we're doing some level of skill inventory, where we're doing some level of communing with staff outside of what they're paid to do, but what they're interested in, what they're passionate about, what they care about, because these are going to be problem-solving tools in the future. Right? Think about a time where you've had an issue. You want somebody, I'll give you a simple example here. I have to make a website. I don't know anything about graphic design. Right? I got no clue. However, the person who's sitting across from me, his name is Zane. I don't know if you've met him, but this person is actually really interested in graphic design. And if I don't know that, I am sitting next to a solution that I have no idea about. If the only thing that I have an awareness of is Zane when he causes problems, I don't know all the problem-solving potential that he has. Right? So if I don't look at what the skill inventory is, then it becomes really difficult for me. And the only person who can solve problems then is me. So if I have a working knowledge of this, then a 5-minute conversation with Zane, hey, are you still really interested in graphic design? And I got a website thing, I'm really running into some problems here. And we can start looking at, hey, this is something that you're strong at. This is something that you're good at. We can address it. Right? But if I have no working understanding of what people are passionate about or what people are strong in, it's really going to be difficult for me to have appreciation as a feature of my culture. So once we establish appreciation as a cultural element, where we start to understand what people do, what people are capable of, what people enjoy doing, those can be levers that we can start using to address the problems that we have. And I'm going to show you the process by which appreciative inquiry tries to address issues as they arise. So it'll look like this. Start out with, what are some moments in our history when we did well? So there's an employee conflict, right? This is affecting the team. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to say, hey, when was this team really connected? When's the last time that this team really felt like we were gelling together, that we did good work, that we had? When was that? When were some good moments in our history where we're all together and we were all on one accord? Right? Then I'm going to talk about, okay, so how do we talk about that? How do we tell that story? What happened there, right? Well, it was we were all on one accord because we really had a difficult partner that we all had to kind of rally around. We all had a shared hatred for blank partner that really brought us together. And so that's how we tell that story, right? So in that, what are we exalting? We're exalting the problem. It's the partner's problem that brought us all together, right? It wasn't It wasn't our decision to put aside our differences and work together. It was actually that the problem was so big we had no choice, right? So how do we talk about these good moments? What stories do we tell other people? What stories do we tell each other? This is how we are framing our strength. And so you might find just in the way that we talk about our problems, that they give them more power than they deserve. Right? So we're talking about this because what we want to do is we want to really exalt the idea that the way that we conceptualize problems is also the way that we're going to handle them. So if we think about, okay, the best version of us was when a giant problem was around, then we're going to be always held back by the idea that we need problems to push us forward, right? But if we talk about how we came together, we decided, we made a conscious effort, then we can do that again. And here, now we're talking about ourselves as a solution and our strength of putting aside our differences and doing this together and make it as the solution, as what we should be focusing on and what we should be building on, right? So that's why we ask about stories. We're trying to make meaning of these stories. So I already kind of talked a little bit about this, but if we think about it thematically, what we want to try and do is make sure that the problem isn't the driving force as to when our best work was around. Right. And so that might require some cultural shifts from you all. That might require some cultural shifts on the team. If you ask your team, when did you do your best work? And the only thing that they talk about was how hard the problem was, then they are missing out on the opportunity to praise themselves and to let you know about all of the good work that was done. Right. So it wasn't the problem that did it. It was you that did it. So what are some themes that are related to moments of exceptional energy that are outside of our problems? Then, so once we get there and once we kind of start exiting the problem as our main focus, we can start asking ourselves, now, we were able to, with this employee thing, we were able to resolve our differences. We were able to have vulnerable conversations. We were able to talk about, here's what I thought or here's what I cared about. And so we were able to kind of come together in this regard. If we say that that's our strength, what's possible? If we remove it from saying, hey, the only reason we did that was because we had a really difficult and tough deadline to reach, and that's why we did this, because we had a deadline, that takes our power away. If we say we did this intentionally, and it doesn't matter, the deadline, that doesn't matter. We made this decision ourselves as a team. We came together as a team. If that's our focus, what's possible? Right? If the problem is not in control, if we can decide at any given time to come together as a team, and there doesn't have to be fire around, what's possible? What can our organization be? If it's up to us and not up to our problems to develop. What inspires us to change if it's not our problems? What if we're working for something other than putting out fires? What does that look like? Right? If we stop giving fires power and we start thinking about the fact that, I'm going to just pick a name out. So we have 60 people. If I say that Jordan and Casey and Debbie are people, and Cortez, so that's our 4-person team. They've gone through a whole bunch of things together, and in each case, they decided that they were going to talk to each other, they were going to share the work, and they were going to have a fluid understanding of whose responsibility is what. And so we exalt that. I can put them in any fire on the planet. They know, regardless of the fire, that they need water, that they need to work together in a specific way to get this done. I'm asking you to focus on the skills that solve the problem, not the problem. So each one of these things, in terms of inspiring us to change, I don't want you to think that it's the problems that inspire us to change. I want you to develop skills. I want you to develop skills because they equip you, because it is your development that makes you better, not the problems that you overcome. Right? So that's the perspective shift that we're looking at. We're trying to figure out what you're good at, what you're strong at, and bolster that and bolster your confidence by letting you know that you are valuable in all of these different ways. Now, once we do that, we can start making commitments. So Once I realized that my 4-person team that I talked about, they're able to come up with things on the spot. They're able to be fluid and changeable. They're able to have kind of a power structure that adapts these things. Now I can start having commitments around. I can start asking the team, okay, so how can we grow outside of problem work? I saw that the last time that we did really good work, we really, really focused on our technical communication skills. And so that's such a huge thing that's helped us in the past. That was part of our best work. We developed a really good, strong communication plan. What commitments can we make knowing that we communicate well? How can we grow that communication? How can we commit to having that level of communication regardless of what happens with us, right? How can those commitments, how can those commitments change the vision we have for this particular team? If I see a team is doing well, I want to make sure to isolate that and have them understand that that should be part of their DNA. I saw you do really, really good work. That good work, that positivity should be how we define ourselves, not the other way around. What do we need from each other to keep that positivity going? Well, during in our problem focused times, I realized that we had so many things to do that communicating with each other was paramount. So I took the extra 5 minutes to send that email to Dana. I took the extra 10 minutes to make sure that when I did something, I let my supervisor know what was going on. I took that extra time. That is what I want to exalt. Right. And so now that you've learned that you can do that, how do we do that? How do we take that and move it to all the time instead of just, hey, we did this when this problem was happening. And now when this problem goes away, so does all that progress. Right? How many times have you been on a team that worked really, really, really super well when everything was on fire? Then things get put out and all of a sudden we don't have efficiency anymore. We don't have accountability anymore. We're not doing the job that we used to do anymore because we focused on doing what we had to do to solve the problem. Once the problem goes away, so does all of our skill. So what we're trying to do is capture that skill and hone that skill and foster that skill outside of problems. That way the problem doesn't have the power. So we got about 26 minutes. I want to pause for just a second. If you have chat questions, if you have any questions, concerns, or contentions with what I've said so far, I recognize that I'm kind of moving quickly through this. So this is kind of a teaser if you'd like to dig a little bit more into this, if you'd like to know how this kind of stuff can work for your team and your business, we absolutely can develop things for you. I have an hour to kind of get through this overview, so I've been going pretty fast. If you have any questions or concerns, toss them in the chat now. I'll pause for about 3 minutes, and then we'll move into putting the rubber to the road. Chris, love this. We're moving towards solution focus. We've discovered that having the right people in the right seats is critical. Eliminating negativity and toxicity has advanced us more than direct efforts alone. Love this. Love this idea. When we have a problem-focused space, there's a lot of negativity that goes into that. If we think that everything is on fire all the time or we're running from one problem to another, the way that we talk about our job, the way that we talk about our struggle even, is kind of in this way that can be considered toxic or negative. And so having that solution focused is always about not exalting the problem, but exalting what you're good at and how you are moving forward. Greg says, as a supervisor, I just want to say thank you. You have opened my eyes to things I need to do with regards to effectively focusing on the success of your employees. I really appreciate that. I will give you my Cash App in a direct message later. the big thing here, and Greg, I agree 100%. Employees who feel successful, who feel appreciated, typically will act with more confidence than employees who don't. We have in the past thought that the idea of striving forward, the idea of adversity is what motivates people to do their best work. And I am telling you that this ideology is the exact opposite. It is that people who are appreciated want to do their best work. It is not people who feel like they need to earn. The chip on your shoulder mentality is over. That concept of I'm not good enough and I'm going to prove myself, that is not a sustainable space to live in. So if you're in a job and you think prove yourself is your main driving factor, it's not sustainable. You must be appreciated. You must feel a sense of success. We'll talk about that more here in a little bit. The task of leadership, says this person who is smarter and more famous than I am, for now, is to create an alignment of strengths in a way that makes a system's weaknesses irrelevant. So what are we focused on? Are we focused on what we are weak in and trying to negate that or mitigate that? And if we are trying to mitigate weakness, what are we doing it with? Strengths. Not a question, but an affirmation in the power of appreciative inquiry. All of our coaching team has embraced it and uses it both internally and with external partners. We are big fans. I love this. So the classic way of looking at this, thank you so much, Michelle. The classic way of looking at this, we have a problem. Let's learn about the problem. Let's focus on the problem. Let's figure out the problem. Let's figure out who's responsible for the problem. Who do we blame for this? Right? Whose responsibility then is it to fix the problem? Okay, so we've established what's wrong. We've established who carries the responsibility. Figure it out. Fix it, right? The AI kind of experiment, the way that we might shift this a little bit, we have a problem. What are we good at? When have we done good work? And how can we draw from that strength to change our situation? What are those strengths that we're talking about? Who has those strengths that we're talking about? Or if we don't have strengths that are specific, right? Because that's one thing that a lot of naysayers to AI, it's, well, we don't have that specific strength, right? So I talked about graphic design. Well, Zane is not exactly a graphic designer, so he doesn't have that strength. So we might have transferable skills. Right? So we might have skills that are adjacent to problem solving. So people who I don't know much about graphic design, but I do love working on computers and I feel like I'm pretty creative. Those are transferable. Does that make sense? So it doesn't always have to be a 1-for-1, right? We're not always going to find a staff member who in their spare time solves the problem that you have. So it's not always going to be that, but there may be some transferable pieces. Or who has a willingness to learn, and how close are they in terms of that transferable skill to learning something new? If we think about it that way, now we've established who's going to use their strengths to address this, now they can fix it. Now, here's the deal. I'm going to ask you a really simple question. I'm going to give you two choices. We have a new project. I'm going to say it to you two ways. The first way, we have a new project. It's going to be difficult. The partner that we have is not very good to work with. They feel like they're a little micromanaging. They need constant updates. They need constant progress reports and things like that. It's going to be a big administrative lift, but I think that we can do it. Who's interested? Who wants that? Right? That's one way of looking at this. The other one, hey, we have new work coming in. We are really diligent and organized. Our team is capable of making sure that we have up-to-date updates for any problem, for any partner, right? We are very, very good at creating infrastructure around requests. So if someone asks us to do something, our team is going to develop that step-by-step process because we're really, really good at that. This new work is going to require that strength. Who's ready to get to work? Which one of these is more appetizing to you? The first one, I said the problems. Here are the problems. We have a partner that is just borderline unreasonable with the amount of requests that they have for progress reports. The other one, I said, we're really good at keeping ourselves organized and communicating in a consistent way. Which one of these is going to inspire a team to do their best work? We have a tough partner, we're a tough team. That's, at the end of the day, that's what I'm talking about here. That's what I'm offering you here with more of an understanding of appreciative inquiry. So here are some useful conditions. How do you get started? Here are some things to think about if you'd like to get started. First, you have to acknowledge what's currently happening. We have to acknowledge current difficulties without assigning blame and focusing collaboration on designing our solutions. And again, that should always be with strength in mind. What are we good at? And how much of what we're good at is part of the design of our solution? There needs to be a congruence of means and ends, right? So that's, what we ask about. We need to be making sure that we are discussing our end result and making sure that as we're asking our questions, it's with that end in mind. We need to be thinking about success as a source of innovation, not problems. We are good because we are good, not we are good because we deal with bad. Our understanding of present and past successes can help us drive that learning and change. And it's going to motivate people to know that the success that they had is appreciated and that it's going to lead to more success in the future. Focus beyond the event. That means learning and change are ongoing processes and they're not linked to a problem. How many of you throughout your professional career developed a skill to address a problem that once the problem was addressed, you never got to use that skill again? You never got appreciated for that skill, and that skill never shows up anymore, right? This is a common issue where you have staff members, and I'm not talking to anybody specific here, but I promise you, with the representation we have 64 people in here. If all of you were supervisors, at least half of you would have staff that you think are just making problems. They can't stand the new system. They can't stand the new things that are happening. They can't stand change. And we think, well, you can't stand change because you think you think that change is a problem. You think that change is something that you have to fight against. You think that change is offending you in some way. What if it's because they're successful with the old way and they don't want to give up their own success? How do we help them feel successful in what they do currently and move that success toward the change? Right? There are a lot of people who see change as a problem instead of to see change as a way to continue success that they already have, right? So success is a form of intervention, focus beyond the event, and then stories over numbers. When we talked about earlier, one of the first things about appreciative inquiry is, when have we done our best work, right? We're not asking what percentage of work do we get done. We're asking a story. Tell me a story about how we've done our best work. And the reason why we do that is because stories are valued differently than data. And so typically what we want to do is we're looking for meaning. When we're looking for meaning, we typically want to go with stories over data. Stories convey meaning in a way that data just does not. And learning about the story is going to be really, really important. Now, I'll give you another really small example. I know we have 15 minutes left. Let's say we have a team that closes out 100% of their cases. And some of you work with teams like this. This team, on the surface, to the bigwigs, they look great. But you go in the pod where they're at, it's bedlam. There's all sorts of people are unhappy. People are getting undercut. People who are doing the majority of the work aren't getting appreciated. The supervisor's barely there. It's a mess in there. But if you look at the data, they're the most successful team. And so you've asked yourself professionally, how are these people appreciated? How? Well, because the data tells a story that actually doesn't exist, right? So that's why we say stories over numbers. We're talking more specifically about being able to discuss culture, being able to discuss how people feel, and culture and data don't jive as well as I'd like them to. So we exalt stories over numbers for that reason. If the focus is success in the past, how do you recommend somebody look at their past successes and current strengths to still look forward and move toward advancements? Also, how do you balance someone's strengths with their preferences? Example, in your example from earlier, the only one on the team that knows anything about graphic design, they're good at it, but they're not interested in graphic design. How do you approach this in a strengths way? Love this. So give me, Sarah, give me just a second. Let me give you both answers. First, how do you recommend someone look at their past successes and current strengths? So what I do and what I think about is a skills inventory, and what I will typically do is look at how have those skills been deployed. Have those skills been deployed on this team? Have you been able to, and we talked about kind of that question, when has the team done its best work, right? And kind of mapping out, and I don't want it to be just one thing. Right? So maybe it's a time during a staff meeting, maybe it's a time during individual supervisions where you're collecting the story from staff. But in that case, what we're trying to do is just establish what staff see themselves as strong in. Right? So that could be something that you can infuse into a yearly review process. That could be something that you infuse into a staff meeting. That could be something that you infuse in other spaces. But what we're doing then is saying, here's what you're good at. And then the work of you as a supervisor or whoever is leading that team, when problems arise, we always want to think about what strengths are available. And then what you're doing is saying, okay, so when I present you with new work, at the very least, I'm going to let you know that you've had successes in the past and this isn't impossible for you. And what I'm going to try and do is marry those successes and take those strengths that you have and apply them in a way that focuses on this new work that I'm giving you. So like I said before, we're a very organized team. We have a group of people that are coming in who are very demanding. The strength of our organization is going to help that. Right? And when I present this, I'm always going to present it as, we're such an organized team, this should be no problem for us. Instead of thinking of it as, this partner is really difficult and we're really going to need to be on top of our game and do our best. We're already doing our best. We're already really good at this. This is our strength. We got it. Right? There's a level of confidence that's communicated there that isn't communicated when I talk about how difficult a partner is. Right? What that tells the staff is, I might not be confident that we can do this. But if I frame it as, here's our strengths, boom, right? So when we're talking about, that's the big deal of moving forward, the key word there is confidence. So if your employee has directly tie-inable strengths or transferable skills, then you have it there, it's already laid out for you. If they don't have that, then what you want to dig into is, what was that success like for you, and what would you like to carry forward from that success? What do you know about yourself professionally? You know that you can learn, you know that you can work hard, you know that your hard work does pay off. Those kind of things are things that if the success is there, but it doesn't correlate directly to the work that's being done, the results of that success absolutely do, right? So in that regard, it's still about building that confidence. You've been successful in these arenas, and these arenas were difficult. You will be successful in this arena. How do you balance strengths with their preferences? This is actually a really great question. So one of the things that you can do, if somebody isn't interested in graphic design, that's fine. Maybe there's somebody who's willing to learn, who that person can then give some resources to or talk through a little bit so that they can inspire that person to be interested in this thing. So think about trying to develop a skill alone versus trying to develop a skill with another staff that might have some like starting skills in it. So I'm not asking you to do, and this is another thing that I've heard fairly often. If I tell people what I'm interested in, I become the blank guy. I become the graphic design guy. So Zane tells me he likes graphic design. Every project that has some graphic design element, I just start assuming Zane's going to do it. I don't give Zane any money. I don't give Zane any recognition. And so that puts Zane in a space where I don't want to do this because that's not the job that I've been hired to do. I agree. right? So what can we do? We can talk to Zane, and I can talk to Zane and say, hey, let me understand how you started here. Maybe you can give me some tips and pointers, and maybe it's not your work. Maybe you can help me build a strength, and I'm going to kind of use the strength that you have and build some for myself, right? Or build some for another staff member. So if they're not interested in doing it, maybe they're interested in transferring some of that responsibility that they feel to somebody else by being a partner to them, right? So it doesn't have to be just doing it. It could be, hey, how can we identify some people with some transferable skills so that you can get them on the path of learning how to do this as well, right? And that kind of agency might change that conversation from everybody always asks me to do this thing for them to I'm building some people who can also do this work so that when it comes down, it's not just me alone, right? And how you approach that, see how I approached it in that kind of strength kind of way? That's what we're looking for. Does that approach answer your question, Sarah? I know I said a lot. So the big thing, okay, appreciate you. The big thing here, AI is not an attempt to excuse or ignore problems. It's not us looking at the world with rose-colored glasses. We're talking about generating ideas based on strength and transferable skills of your team and how those strengths and those team transferable skills might affect the problem rather than generating ideas based on the problem alone, right? You're also centering discussion around what staff is doing well and what your team is doing well, where the team's success lies, and using these elements to help motivate people to address anything with confidence, right? Because success is the backbone of your team, not problems. We have about 7 minutes. And I told you earlier that there's a lot of lists of things that people, in order for the people to be successful, the old paradigm was people needed to be successful if they were hungry. People needed to be successful if they wanted to thrive and succeed based on breaking through, breaking out, right? People are going to be successful if their belonging hinges on their success. I am trying as hard as I can to break down this paradigm and shift it to people must know they belong. People must know that they are valued. People must know where your organization or your community is headed, and they must know that the excellence that they have, number one, they must know they have excellence. Let me be very clear about that. You cannot expect excellence from somebody who you don't tell is excellent. If they have no strength to build on, you can't expect them to be strong. So any space that says excellence is expected must celebrate excellence. It must identify excellence. It must give a path to excellence. And people must know that their contributions go to something bigger than themselves. If we're going to empower people, it's going to be based on these things. That's what appreciative inquiry is kind of all about. Right? So we got about 5 minutes. Here's our start. Asking people to share stories of success and ideas for the future. Now that indicates that they are valued for their contribution. And for some staff, having a supervisor say, hey, what are you good at? What do you care about? What matters to you? Could be an entirely different experience for them. Illumination, focusing on those stories of success, it will reveal people's strengths and their contributions, including people in the process. Creates that sense of belonging and opportunities for collaboration and co-creation, and then sharing stories, being generous with appreciation and encouraging others to do the same. These are ways that you can start building appreciation into the culture and the fabric of your team or your job, and that's a start that I can appreciate. Any questions, concerns, or contentions with what you've heard? If not, get out of here. Enjoy the rest of your day. If so, hang out. Let's argue.